Friday the 21st of February 2020, the tarmac at Manchester Airport was slick with morning dew, and the terminal was already humming with the chaotic energy of the pre-dawn rush. Families dragged suitcases through sliding doors, exhausted parents wrangled excited children, and business travelers checked their watches. Amidst this swirl of activity, a seamless exchange was taking place at the drop-off zones. Men in crisp, high-visibility jackets waved expensive SUVs into reserved bays with professional efficiency. Keys were handed over, smiles were exchanged, and paperwork was signed. To the untrained eye, it was just another day of logistical clockwork, but as the planes banked over the runway, disappearing into the clouds, the vehicles on the ground were beginning a very different journey. Weeks later, the reality would dawn on investigators. This was not just a parking mix-up. It was the ignition point of a criminal engine that would run for years. Fast forward to a freezing morning in October 2024, and the scene shifts from the polished glass of the airport to the grimy, red brick shadows of Oldham. In the corner of a derelict mill, under the harsh hum of industrial strip lights, high-end cars sat half dismantled. The faces of the men holding the tools were different, but the rhythm was identical. They called themselves 50, and they were the heirs to a scam that had never truly died. This is the story of the Manchester Airport Valet scam, and the dismantled empire that learned to rebuild itself. The brilliance of the initial operation lay in its exploitation of trust. Meet and greet parking services are a staple of modern travel, offering convenience for a premium price. The criminals understood that if you look the part, no one questions the intent. The operation established a digital facade that was virtually indistinguishable from legitimate businesses. They created sophisticated websites, featuring stolen logos, glowing 5-star testimonials copied from genuine competitors, and convincing confirmation emails. When a traveler booked online, they believed they were securing a safe spot for their prized possession. At the terminal, the illusion was maintained with terrifying competence. The operatives wore branded lanyards and carried printed checklists bearing the airport's official terminology. They met customers at the curb, exuding the hurried professionalism of airport staff. They took the keys and drove the vehicles away in full view of the terminal's CCTV cameras. There was no sneaking around, no broken glass, and no hot wiring. The victims willingly handed over their cars, watched them drive off, and then boarded their flights, completely unaware that their vehicles were never going to a secure compound. Instead of a parking lot, the cars were driven immediately onto the side roads, heading away from the airport and toward the industrial outskirts of Greater Manchester. They were funneled into the sprawling grey networks of Oldham, Chadderton and Radcliffe areas that would soon become known as the Bermuda Triangle for luxury vehicles. These districts, characterized by labyrinthine unit yards and shuttered Victorian mills, provided the perfect camouflage. The targets were specific and high value: Range Rovers, BMWs, Audis, Porsches and Mercedes. This was not opportunistic joyriding. It was a shopping list fulfillment service. By the time the unsuspecting owners landed back in the UK, tanned and relaxed, their cars had often ceased to exist in their original form. When they called the number on their valet ticket to arrange a pickup, they were met with a dead line or a disconnected tone. The websites had vanished, the staff had evaporated, and the realization set in that their car had not been parked, but harvested. The investigation into the missing airport vehicles initially stumbled in the dark. For weeks, it was treated as a civil dispute, a series of unfortunate contract failures between holidaymakers and the defunct parking firm. But as the reports stacked up, a pattern emerged that police could no longer ignore. The cars were not just displaced, they were being funneled into a black hole. When detectives finally traced the GPS signal of a recovered vehicle, it did not lead to a parking lot, but to the rusted, corrugated doors of an industrial unit in Oldham. This was the first thread that, when pulled, would unravel an entire criminal tapestry woven through the industrial heart of Greater Manchester. The locations chosen for these crimes were not accidental. The gang operated out of places like Chadderton and Radcliffe, areas historically dotted with shuttered textile mills and nondescript units as yards. These ghost towns of industry provided the perfect acoustic camouflage. The narrow access roads discouraged casual traffic, and the ambient noise from legitimate nearby workshops, grinders, and compressors, and heavy machinery masked the screech of metal saws cutting through luxury chassis. To a passerby, it sounded like honest work. Inside, It was the sound of millions of pounds worth of automotive engineering being destroyed. At the center of this web sat Asif Hussein. On paper, Hussein presented himself as a legitimate entrepreneur. His company, German Automotive 365 Limited, was registered to a modest address and ostensibly dealt in car parts. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic camouflage. To the outside world, he was a businessman navigating a tough economy. To investigators, his paperwork was merely a veil for a high-volume stolen goods empire. Working alongside him was Hadier Ali, the operations manager who handled the day-to-day grit. Ali's name appeared on tenancy agreements for multiple sites, including a cavernous space at Stockfield Mill in Chadderton. When police eventually gained access to this site, the scene was forensic chaos. Stripped Land Rovers, cloned parts, and piles of metal shavings, where chassis numbers had been violently ground away to erase the vehicle's true identities. The broader team operated with the discipline of a factory production line. Sajid Jangharia was the transport specialist, the man responsible for moving the freshly stolen hot cars from the airport drop-off zones to the cooling-off units. Tayyub Hasnain managed logistics within Greater Manchester, constantly sourcing new premises and moving equipment to ensure the operation stayed one step ahead of landlord suspicion or police interest. Meanwhile, Ibra Shafi kept the money moving, washing the illicit proceeds through a complex cycle that we will explore later. When detectives began to comb through the digital debris left by the group's seized phones and laptops, the level of premeditation became chillingly clear. Messages did not just discuss random thefts. They referenced specific shopping lists. Buyers overseas would request a particular model, color, and trim level, say a white Range Rover Sport with a beige interior, and Hussein's team would hunt for that exact match at the airport terminals. Customs data further revealed a fake freight business, Kilogram Logistics, used to book shipping containers under cloned company identities. The network had transformed car theft from a crime of opportunity into a global supply chain. What began with a few missing keys at a valet stand had grown into a multi-million-pound export line, and the police were only just beginning to see the true scale of the monster they were chasing. By early 2021, the surveillance net had tightened. Detectives from Greater Manchester Police's Vehicle Interference Unit, working in tandem with the Regional Organised Crime Unit, had gathered enough intelligence to move from observation to intervention. They knew who, they knew where, and crucially, they knew when. The operation needed to be surgical. A tip-off to one site could lead to the others scrubbing their evidence within minutes. The decision was made to launch a series of simultaneous dawn raids, a coordinated strike designed to sever the head of the network while paralyzing its limbs. The first doors were breached just after 5:00 a.m. in Oldham, the sound of enforcement enforcers shattering the morning silence. Within moments, synchronized entries were taking place at industrial estates in Wigan and Stockport. Officers, supported by tactical teams and dogs, flooded the premises. What they found behind the heavy metal shutters was exactly what the surveillance drones had hinted at, but on a scale that shocked even seasoned officers. It was a production line of destruction. Inside the units, the concrete floors were a graveyard of automotive luxury. Range Rovers, Porsche Cayennes, and Jaguars lay in various stages of dissection, reduced from status symbols to bare metal skeletons. Engines were wrapped in heavy plastic, tagged with shipping codes, and stacked on pallets, ready for the next leg of a journey their owners never authorized. Computers seized at the scene revealed the next phase of the pipeline: export. The network had already successfully shipped 11 containers out of the country. Through rapid international cooperation, authorities managed to intercept 3 of them. One was stopped at Seaforth Dock in Merseyside, another was halted in Istanbul, and a third was seized in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. When these steel boxes were cracked open, the cunning of the smuggling operation was revealed. The dismantled luxury cars were not just thrown in. They were concealed behind walls of declared junk, old tires and scrap metal meant to fool X-ray scanners and customs inspectors. The high-value engines and transmissions were buried deep inside, listed on manifests as used mechanical parts of negligible value. However, the physical raids only told half the story. When financial investigators began to peel back the layers of the gang's funding, they uncovered a deception that was perhaps even more infuriating than the thefts themselves. Seized phones contained messages referencing loans and funds coming in, Initially dismissed as criminal slang for drug money or fencing profits, the truth was far more audacious. Asif Hussein and his financial handler Ibra Shafi had been systematically looting the British taxpayer. Two companies, German Automotive 365 Limited and Merck Carbreakers, were central to this fraud. On paper, they appeared to be struggling small businesses in the automotive sector. In reality, neither had ever filed a legitimate tax return. Yet, they had applied for and received a combined £145,000 in government bounce-back loans funds, specifically designed to keep honest businesses afloat during the crushing economic pressure of the COVID-19 pandemic. The audacity was breathtaking. German Automotive 365, a shell company with no employees and no trade, received £50,000 within a week of applying. Detectives traced this money and found it was not used to pay staff or rent. It was used to purchase the very transport vans used to steal the cars, to pay the leases on the chop shops in Chadderton, and to book the shipping containers for the stolen goods. The gang was effectively using public money to bankroll an organized crime wave against the public. Another £95,000 was funneled through Shafi's accounts, mixed with the proceeds of car parts sold online, washing the money clean before it was reinvested into the criminal enterprise. The bounce-back loans were not a lifeline. They were venture capital for a car theft cartel. The courtroom at Manchester Crown Court in January 2022 was heavy with silence, as the full scope of the operation was laid bare. Prosecutors detailed a litany of theft and fraud that saw more than 90 vehicles with an estimated combined value of £3 million vanish from the UK streets. Judge Anthony Cross KC did not mince words in his sentencing remarks. He described the operation as industrial in scale and reserved particular venom for the exploitation of the government's COVID support scheme. To the court, the use of public funds money printed to save livelihoods to bankroll the destruction of private property was a moral failing that compounded the criminal act. He ordered a formal inquiry into the catastrophic failure of oversight that allowed a criminal gang to treat the Treasury like a personal ATM. As the sentences were handed down, the severity reflected the sophistication of the crime. Asif Hussein, the architect of the scheme, received the longest term, 15 years in prison. His right-hand man, Hadier Ali, was sentenced to 11 years. Sajid Janghada, the transport lead, was given 10 years. Tayyub Hasnain and Ibra Shafi received 5 years and 6 months and 5 years, respectively. On the surface, it looked like a decisive victory for law enforcement. The ringleaders were caged, the chop shops were shuttered, and the company was dissolved. But detectives from GMP's organized crime unit knew better than to celebrate too early. They understood a fundamental truth about the illicit trade in luxury vehicles. As long as the demand exists, someone will rise to supply it. The reality is that groups like Hussein's are merely the local franchises of a global conglomerate. The cars stolen in Manchester were rarely destined for British roads. In March 2025, Interpol's Operation Safe Wheels highlighted exactly where these vehicles end up. Checkpoints across 12 West African countries, including Ghana, began flagging British-plated luxury cars at an alarming rate. These vehicles had been laundered through layers of forged paperwork, entering the local market as legitimate imports. Unwitting buyers in Accra or Lagos were driving Range Rovers stolen from driveways in Cheshire, completely unaware of the vehicle's dark history. The tendrils reached even further. A Range Rover stolen from Harrogate was tracked by its stubborn onboard computer all the way to Karachi, Pakistan. In the same city, a Bentley Mulsanne taken from London was found parked in the affluent Defence Housing Authority district. In Southeast Asia, Operation Titanium linked UK finance fraud thefts to high-end showrooms in Bangkok, recovering millions of pounds worth of Lamborghinis and Porsches. The global hunger for right-hand drive luxury vehicles, specifically in countries that share the UK's driving configuration, creates an insatiable vacuum. The UK serves as a prime hunting ground for these international syndicates. The specific shopping lists found on the gang's phones were not random. They were direct orders from this global market. Officers also intercepted containers in British ports like Essex and Merseyside, finding SUVs stacked precariously on tyres and suspended by cargo traps, packed like sardines to maximize profit per square foot of shipping space. From the docks of Tilbury to the ports of West Africa, the supply chain remained intact. Hussein and his crew were removed from the equation. But the infrastructure of the trade, the routes, the buyers, and the methods remained. The company was gone, but the void it left in the criminal underworld of Manchester was already creating a pressure vacuum. It would not take long for new players to step out of the shadows to fill it. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the criminal underworld is no exception. With Hussein's company dismantled and its leadership serving aggregate decades behind bars, the silence in Manchester's industrial estates was short-lived. By early 2023, intelligence reports landing on the desks of Greater Manchester Police began to show familiar tremors. High-value vehicles were vanishing again. Not just from airport valet zones this time, but from driveways across the affluent suburbs. The methods had evolved, but the destination remained the same: the dark, oily interiors of unit yards in Oldham and Chadderton. The resurgence was driven by a new network, a younger, more brazen generation that adopted the moniker 50. The name was a deliberate, arrogant nod to the slang term for police, 50. It was a taunt, a statement of intent, that they were operating right under the nose of the law, unafraid of the consequences that had befallen their predecessors. This group, however, was structured differently. If Hussein's operation was a corporate hierarchy, the 50 network was a gig economy franchise. It was decentralized, built on distribution rather than strict command. At the center of this web was Asif Hussein, a figure well versed in the mechanics of vehicle crime. Hussein did not just inherit the business model, he optimized it. He acted as the hub for a series of independent contractors. Shawaz Rahman ran one of the busiest chop shops in Oldham, a unit capable of stripping a Range Rover to its chassis in under 2 hours. Imran Taj managed the logistics, moving the stripped carcasses to scrap buyers, while Zian Ali and Muhammad Irfan handled the technical wizardry, reprogramming EKRs, removing trackers, and grinding VINs. The theft methodology had also sharpened. While they still utilized the valet concept occasionally, they leaned heavily into technology-driven driveway thefts. Using relay attack devices, they could amplify the signal from a car key sitting on a hallway table inside a victim's home, tricking the vehicle on the driveway into unlocking and starting. It was silent, contactless, and took less than 60 seconds. But where the previous generation had focused solely on cars, elements of the 50 crew were dangerous hybrids. Adam Elwood, one of the younger associates, bridged the gap between vehicle theft and street-level violence. He utilized the stolen high-performance vehicles not just for profit, but as tools for the drug trade, running narcotics across county lines and engaging in dangerous driving to evade capture. The stolen cars became disposable assets in a much grittier game, increasing the risk to the public significantly. Police response had to evolve to match this localized insurgency. Operation Avis was launched, but this time the detectives had a new eye in the sky. The investigation leaned heavily on drone technology. For months, silent quadcopters hovered invisibly in the night sky above suspected industrial units. They were not just looking for movement. They were looking for heat. Thermal cameras picked up the glowing signatures of vehicle engines that had just been driven inside dormant warehouses. At 3:00 a.m., they watched as the heat signatures of vans arrived shortly after, and how the warmth of the stolen cars dissipated as they were meticulously taken apart piece by piece. The 50 gang believed they were invisible behind their metal shutters, but from the air, they were broadcasting their crimes in high definition. The trap was being set, and this time the police intended to catch the network in the very act of dismantling the evidence. Dawn broke over Greater Manchester on a Tuesday in October 2024, but for the men of the 50 network, the day had started much earlier, ending abruptly with the sound of battering rams. Operation Avis, the culmination of months of thermal drone surveillance and covert tracking, was a strike-hard, strike-fast initiative. 8 simultaneous warrants were executed across Oldham, Stockport, Radcliffe, and Wigan. Just after 5:00 a.m., tactical teams breached the reinforced doors of the industrial units. The element of surprise was absolute. There was no time to shred documents, wipe hard drives, or grind away the final chassis numbers. Inside the units, the scene was a forensic goldmine. It was a mirror image of the raids that had taken down Hussein's crew years earlier, proving that the blueprint for vehicle theft had been passed down almost intact. Officers found rows of luxury vehicles in various states of undress. There were stripped dashboards, seats stacked like dominoes, and electronic modules. The brains of the cars cloned and piled on workbenches. More than 90 vehicles or stripped assemblies were identified. The most damning evidence, however, was ready for travel. Engines and transmissions were found shrink-wrapped in industrial plastic, tagged with destination initials that read like a travel brochure: Turkey, the UAE, and West Africa. This was not a local chop shop. It was an international departure lounge for stolen goods. Digital forensics provided the final nail in the coffin. Seized laptops and burners revealed the digital skeleton of the network chats coordinating pickups, photos of stolen cars sent to buyers for approval, and shipping drafts listing luxury car parts as low-value scrap metal. By midday, the hierarchy of the 50 gang was in custody. Asif Matadar, Shawaz Rahman, Imran Taj, Zian Ali, Adam Elwood, Mohammed Irfan, and James Hopkinson were processed, their fingerprints replacing the gloves they used to dismantle the cars. In October 2024, the case concluded at Manchester Crown Court. Judge Neil Usher described the group as a highly professional and organized enterprise, noting the seamless blend of theft, fraud, and export crime. The sentences reflected the severity of their impact on the region. Adam Elwood, whose criminality spilled over into drug supply and dangerous driving, received the harshest sentence of 6 years. Shawaz Rahman, the master of the chop shop, was jailed for 4 years and 9 months. Imran Tajin Zianadi received 4 years and 3 years, 9 months respectively. Asif Matadar, the connector, was handed 3 years and 6 months. In total, the group faced over 25 years of imprisonment. As the heavy doors of the prison vans slammed shut, a familiar quiet returned to the industrial estates of Oldham and Chatterton. But for the detectives of the Greater Manchester Police, victory is always tinged with realism. They have cut off the head of the snake twice now, first the company, then the 50. Yet the global demand for these vehicles has not dipped. Somewhere in a shipping container, a car is moving across an ocean. Somewhere in a quiet suburb, a thief is scanning a key signal. The players change, the technology evolves, but the game remains the same. The dismantled empire has been stopped for now. But history suggests that in the shadows of the old mills, the next generation is already watching, learning, and waiting for their turn. What do you think about the sentences handed down in these cases? Do they fit the scale of the crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into the UK's car theft underworld informative, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Crime Lens for more investigations into the crimes that shape our streets.